The alarm screamed through the control center of Gate Nexus 7, a sound that Senior Controller HFY had never heard in his 30 years of service. His 6 arms moved frantically across the control panels, his blue-scaled face growing pale as impossible readings flashed across his screens. "This cannot be right," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the chaos erupting around him. The gate, a massive ring of crystalline metal floating in space, was designed to regulate all travel between star systems. Nothing could pass through without proper authorization codes, nothing. Yet something was coming. "Controller HFY," shouted his assistant, a young Zephyrian whose tail feathers were trembling with fear. "The quantum barriers are failing. Something is forcing its way through." HFY's heart sank as he watched the impossible happen. The energy readings climbing on his screen were beyond anything in the database. Whatever was approaching the gate was not just unauthorized, it was using brute force to tear through defenses that had protected the galaxy for thousands of years. "Send an emergency signal to the peacekeeping fleet," he ordered, his voice steady despite his growing terror. "Tell them we have a breach. A big one." The gate began to glow, its ancient crystals pulsing with dangerous light. Space itself seemed to bend and twist around the massive ring as something pushed against reality from the other side. The monitoring station shook violently, and several technicians fell from their chairs. Then it happened. The barrier exploded outward in a shower of broken energy, and through the ruined gate came a ship unlike anything in the galactic database. It was huge, over a kilometer long, and looked like it had been built for war. Its hull was dark metal covered in scorch marks and dents. Weapon ports bristled along its sides like the spines of an angry beast. "By the stars," breathed HFY. "What is that thing?" His scanners worked frantically to identify the vessel. The design was primitive by galactic standards. Crude metal construction held together with welds and bolts instead of elegant energy fields. Yet it radiated power like a caged star. Whatever engines drove it forward burned so hot that his instruments could barely measure their output. "I have a species identification," called out another technician. "The bioscanners are reading." "This cannot be correct. What is it?" HFY demanded. "Human," the technician replied, his voice filled with disbelief. "The crew signatures are reading as human." Silence fell over the control room. Every being present knew about humans. They were listed in the galactic database as a primitive species confined to a single world in the outer rim. Pre-warp technology, stone tools and chemical rockets. They should not even have spaceflight, much less the ability to build warships or break through interdimensional gates. "Run the scan again," HFY ordered. There must be an error. The results came back the same. Human. Definitely human. The massive warship continued forward, ignoring all attempts at communication. It moved with purpose, as if it knew exactly where it was going. Behind it, the gate flickered and sparked, badly damaged from whatever the ship had done to force its way through. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "I am detecting more energy signatures approaching the gate from the same vector." Multiple contacts. HFY felt his blood turn cold. "How many?" "Unknown, sir. The readings are strange. Unlike anything in our database." As if responding to his words, something else began to push through the damaged gate. But this time the energy signatures were different. Dark, hungry, wrong in ways that made every instinct scream danger. The human warship seemed to sense the approaching threat. Its engines flared brighter, and it accelerated away from the gate at speeds that should have torn it apart. Warning broadcasts began transmitting from the ship in multiple languages, though none of the controllers could understand them yet. "Get me a translator working on those signals," HFY ordered, "and send another message to the fleet. Tell them to hurry." The first of the pursuing ships began to emerge from the gate, and HFY wished he had never seen it. The vessel was wrong on every level, part machine, part something that might once have been alive. Its hull pulsed like a heartbeat, and organic-looking cables writhed along its surface. Dark energy leaked from it like blood from a wound. More of the nightmare ships followed. Dozens, then hundreds. Each one was different, as if they had been grown rather than built. Some were small and fast, darting through space like predatory fish. Others were massive, their hulls bloated with unknown purposes. All of them shared the same wrongness, the same sense of hunger that made every living being want to run. "What are they?" whispered the young assistant. HFY had no answer. In all his years of service and all the records of galactic history, nothing like these ships had ever been seen. They moved with intelligence but without the patterns of any known species. They seemed to be hunting the human warship, but their attention was already turning toward the monitoring station. "Evacuate the platform," he ordered. "Send everything we have recorded to Fleet Command. They need to know what is coming." As the evacuation began, Vex-High watched the impossible scene unfold on his screens. The human warship, primitive by galactic standards but somehow powerful enough to break through an interdimensional gate, was being chased by a fleet of nightmare vessels that should not exist. And now both groups were in civilized space, bringing their war with them. The monitoring station's engines fired, pushing the platform away from the gate as fast as possible. Behind them, more of the dark ships continued to emerge. Vex-High tried to count them but gave up as the numbers climbed past 1,000. This was not just a small raiding force or a lost patrol. This was an invasion fleet, sir, the communications officer called out. "I am receiving a message from the peacekeeping fleet. Admiral Thysanara is en route with a first contact flotilla." First contact? Vex-High almost laughed despite the terror of the situation. "Tell the Admiral this is not first contact. This is war." As the monitoring station fled toward the safety of the inner systems, Vex-High took one last look at the gate. The human warship was already disappearing toward the shipping lanes, trailing the massive alien fleet behind it like a comet's tail of destruction. Whatever these humans were running from, they had just brought it into the most densely populated region of the galaxy. The young assistant approached him, still trembling. "Controller, what do we do now?" Vex-High closed his eyes and tried to think. In 30 years of managing interdimensional traffic, he had never faced anything like this. The protocols did not cover primitive species with impossible warships being chased by fleets of nightmares. There was no procedure for what to do when reality itself was torn open by beings who should not exist. "Now," he said finally, "we pray that the fleet knows what they are doing, because if they do not, we may all be dead before morning." The alarm continued to scream as they fled into the darkness, carrying news that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The gate behind them flickered and died, its ancient mechanisms finally giving up under the strain, but the damage was already done. Something had broken through from the outer darkness, bringing war to a galaxy that had known peace for 1,000 years. And at the center of it all was a single human warship, carrying secrets that would change everything. Admiral Thysanara had handled first contact situations before. She was known throughout the peacekeeping fleet for her calm approach to new species and her ability to establish diplomatic relations even with the most difficult cultures. Her record was perfect, 17 successful first contacts without a single violent incident. That record was about to end. Her flagship, the Harmony's Edge, dropped out of hyperspace 3 light minutes from the unauthorized vessel, followed by 12 other ships of her first contact flotilla. They were sleek, elegant vessels designed to impress rather than intimidate. Their hulls gleamed silver in the starlight, and their weapons were carefully concealed behind decorative panels. "Standard formation," she ordered from her command chair, her forearms moving gracefully across the control interfaces. As a member of the Altarian species, she stood nearly 3 meters tall with pale purple skin and large, understanding eyes that had looked into the faces of dozens of species and found common ground with all of them. Today would be different. "Admiral," reported her sensor operator. "The unauthorized vessel is maintaining course toward the Kepler shipping lanes. It has not responded to our hails or acknowledged our presence." Thysanara frowned. Most primitive species were either curious or frightened when they encountered advanced civilizations. This ship was acting like it simply did not care that 13 peacekeeping vessels were following it. "Keep trying to establish communication. Use the standard linguistic patterns and mathematical sequences. Surely they will recognize—" "Admiral!" The communications officer's voice cracked with excitement. "I have a signal." "They are responding." The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the human vessel. Thysanara had expected to see primitive beings overwhelmed by their first contact with galactic civilization. Instead, she found herself looking at a woman in her 40s wearing a military uniform that had seen better days. The woman's dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her brown eyes held the hard look of someone who had seen too much combat. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Space Service vessel Retribution," the woman said without preamble. "You are interfering with a military operation." "Move aside." Tisanara blinked in surprise. The human was speaking perfect galactic standard, though with an accent she did not recognize. More shocking was the woman's attitude. She was giving orders to a peacekeeping fleet admiral as if she had the authority to do so. "Captain Vasquez," Tisanara replied, using her most diplomatic tone. "I am Admiral Tisanara of the Galactic Peacekeeping Fleet. Your vessel has violated several interstellar laws by forcing passage through Gate Nexus 7 without authorization. We need to discuss—" "No time," Vasquez interrupted, checking something off screen. "You have about 2.5 hours before they come through the gate. You can either help us kill them, or you can spend that time explaining to whatever's left of your civilizations why you let them into your space." "Let who into our space?" Tisanara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The Devourers," Vasquez said simply. "They have been chasing us for 3 months. We broke through your gate because it was the only way to stay ahead of them. They will follow." The Admiral felt a chill run through her body. Her sensors had detected the strange ships emerging from the damaged gate, but she had hoped they were some kind of natural phenomenon or perhaps a malfunction of the gate itself. "Captain, I do not understand. According to our records, your species is pre-warp. You should not have the technology for interstellar travel, much less ships capable of breaking through our gates." Vasquez laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Your records are 50 years out of date, Admiral. A lot has changed since then." 50 years? Tisanara was confused. "The last survey of your system was only—" She stopped as her aide whispered in her ear, checking the database. The last survey of the human home system had been 48 years ago. It had been classified as routine monitoring of a primitive world with no spacefaring capability. "Captain, what happened to your world?" For the first time, Vasquez's professional mask slipped. Pain flickered across her face before she regained control. "They came from outside the galaxy. We called them Devourers because that is what they do. They devour entire worlds. Earth fell in the first wave. We have been fighting them ever since." The bridge of the Harmony's edge fell silent. Every officer present understood the implications. An entire species had been at war for decades, and the galactic community had never known. "How many of you survived?" Tisanara asked softly. 50,000, Vasquez replied. "Maybe less. The Retribution is carrying the last of humanity. Everyone else is dead." The Admiral felt her hearts break. She had seen refugees before, but never the sole survivors of an entire species. "Captain, if you are refugees seeking sanctuary—" "We are not refugees," Vasquez cut her off, her voice hard again. "We are soldiers. We have been fighting the Devourers longer than anyone else has been alive, and we are very good at killing them. The question is whether your people are smart enough to listen to us before they arrive." As if summoned by her words, the ship's sensors detected new energy signatures emerging from the distant gate. The nightmare vessels that had pursued the Retribution were beginning to spread through the system. "Admiral," her sensor operator called out, "I am detecting massive energy readings from the approaching vessels. Whatever they are powerful." "They are hungry," Vasquez said grimly, "and they have just found a galaxy full of fresh prey. Admiral, I strongly suggest you get on your communications and warn every world in this sector. The Devourers do not take prisoners. They do not negotiate. They consume everything organic and add it to their fleet." Tisanara stared at the tactical display showing hundreds of unknown contacts spreading through her sector. Her training told her to follow protocol, to establish proper communication channels with the unknown species, and attempt to find a diplomatic solution. Her instincts told her that Captain Vasquez was telling the truth. "What do you propose we do?" she asked. "Same thing we have been doing for 50 years, Vasquez replied. "We fight. But this time we do not have to fight alone. Your ships are more advanced than anything we had on Earth, but your weapons are designed for civilized warfare. The Devourers are not civilized. They are a plague. And you fight plagues with fire. Captain, the peacekeeping fleet does not—" Alarms began sounding throughout the Harmony's edge. The lead elements of the Devourer fleet had detected the peacekeeping vessels and were moving to intercept. "Too late for politics, Admiral," Vasquez said as her own ship's weapons powered up. "Time to see if your people know how to fight." The first Devourer ship opened fire with weapons that defied classification. Dark energy lanced across space, striking one of Tisanara's frigates. The elegant vessel's shields flared and died, and something began eating through its hull like acid. "Return fire," Thisanara ordered, but she could see it was hopeless. Her energy weapons barely scratched the organic-looking hull of the enemy vessel. The Retribution moved forward, its primitive-looking weapon systems charging. When it fired, the results were spectacular. Solid projectiles accelerated to incredible speed struck the Devourer ship, punching clean through its hull. Nuclear warheads detonated inside the creature, and it died screaming across multiple radio frequencies. "Kinetic weapons only," Vasquez broadcast to the fleet. "Energy weapons feed them. Aim for the neural clusters, the parts that glow. And whatever you do, do not let them board your ships." As more Devourer vessels closed in, Thisanara realized that everything she knew about warfare was about to become useless. The elegant, civilized conflicts of the past were nothing compared to this. This was survival warfare, the kind fought by desperate beings with nothing left to lose. Looking at Captain Vasquez on her screen, the Admiral finally understood what she was seeing. This was not a primitive human who had stumbled onto advanced technology. This was a survivor of a war that had lasted longer than most civilizations existed. A war that was now coming to the galaxy. "All ships," she ordered, "follow the human vessel's lead. Prepare for close combat." The battle began like nothing Admiral Thisanara had ever experienced. She had studied military history, read accounts of the great wars between the ancient powers, but those had been civilized conflicts fought with rules and honor. This was something else entirely. The Devourer ships moved like living things because they were living things, or had been once. As they closed with the peacekeeping flotilla, their hulls rippled and changed, growing new weapon ports and extending tentacle-like appendages that reached for her ships. When they fired, it was not with clean energy beams or precisely targeted missiles, but with streams of something that looked like liquid darkness and weapons that screamed across radio frequencies. Her frigate Celestial Dawn took the first hit. The elegant ship's energy shields absorbed the initial impact, but then something began eating through the barrier itself. Within seconds, the shield collapsed entirely and the dark energy struck the hull directly. "Damage report," Thisanara called out. "Hull breach on decks 12 through 15. Her damage control officer reported, his voice tight with fear. "But Admiral, the metal is still dissolving. Whatever hit us is continuing to spread." She watched in horror as sections of her ship simply melted away, consumed by whatever the Devourers had fired at them. Her return fire, precise particle beams that could cut through asteroids, struck the enemy vessel and seemed to make it stronger. The creature's hull absorbed her weapons and used the energy to heal damage and grow new weapons. "All ships, cease fire," she ordered. "Our weapons are feeding them." The Retribution moved past her flagship like a predator diving on prey. The human ship was scarred and battered, its hull showing signs of countless battles, but it moved with deadly purpose. When it opened fire, the difference was immediate and shocking. Massive kinetic projectiles, simple chunks of metal accelerated to incredible speeds, punched through the Devourer's living hull like spears through flesh. The creature convulsed and screamed across multiple frequencies as nuclear warheads detonated inside its body. Within minutes, the nightmare vessel was dead, its corrupted remains drifting in space. "This is Captain Vasquez to all peacekeeping vessels." The human's voice crackled over the communication system. "Your energy weapons are useless against them. They feed on energy and use it to grow stronger. Kinetic weapons only. Railguns, mass drivers, old-fashioned bullets if that's all you have. Target the neural clusters, the glowing parts. And remember, they heal fast, so make every shot count." Thisanara looked at her weapons officer helplessly. The peacekeeping fleet had not carried kinetic weapons in over 200 years. Such crude devices were considered primitive and inhumane. Her ships were equipped with precise energy weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. "Admiral," her tactical officer called out, "3 more Devourers are approaching from starboard. They are ignoring our fire and closing for boarding range." She watched the approaching creatures with growing despair. They looked like someone's nightmare of what a spaceship might become if it were alive and hungry. Organic cables writhed along their hulls and what looked like eyes opened and closed along their flanks. One of them was growing what appeared to be a massive mouth, filled with metal teeth the size of shuttlecraft. The Retribution moved to intercept, its weapons firing continuously. Each shot was brutally effective. The human ship carried no elegant energy weapons, just raw destructive power designed to kill things as efficiently as possible. Nuclear missiles streaked through space, followed by streams of depleted uranium projectiles that could punch through a moon. But there were too many devourers, and more were emerging from the gate every minute. Captain Vasquez, Thisanara called out, "We need to retreat. My ships cannot fight these things effectively." "Retreat where?" came the reply. "They will follow you to every populated world in this sector. The only way out is through." A devourer ship managed to latch onto the cruiser Peaceful Resolution. Thisanara watched in horror as the creature began to cut through the hull with what looked like acid. Her officers aboard the cruiser reported that something was trying to force its way inside. "All crew to evacuation pods," she ordered, but it was too late. The screaming started a few seconds later. Whatever had gotten aboard the cruiser was not interested in taking prisoners. The communications from the ship became increasingly frantic and then stopped entirely. When the devourer ship finally released its grip and moved on, the Peaceful Resolution was a hollow shell drifting in space. 67 crew lost, her communications officer reported quietly. Thisanara closed her eyes in grief. In her entire career, she had never lost a ship or its crew. Now she had lost both in the first 10 minutes of combat with an enemy she did not understand. "Admiral," Captain Vasquez's voice cut through her anguish, "I know this is hard, but we need to focus. The main fleet will be here soon, and if we do not stop the advance elements, your entire sector is doomed." The Retribution swept past her flagship again, its hull now glowing from the heat of continuous weapons fire. The human ship was taking damage. She could see atmosphere venting from several breaches, but it kept fighting with a desperation that spoke of long experience with hopeless battles. "How long have you been fighting them?" she asked. 53 years, 4 months, 18 days, Vasquez replied without hesitation. "Since the first ships arrived at Earth. We have been at war so long that most of our crew were born on this ship." The implications hit Thisanara like a physical blow. The Retribution was not just a warship. It was a home to people who had never known peace. Children had grown up aboard that vessel, learning to fight an enemy that consumed everything they loved. "How many devourers are there?" she asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. "We estimate they have consumed at least 3 galaxies," Vasquez replied. "Maybe more." "They do not stop, Admiral. They do not negotiate or retreat. They eat everything organic and turn it into more of themselves. The only language they understand is violence." Another of her ships, the destroyer Harmonious Future, exploded as a devourer vessel rammed it directly. The creature did not seem to care that the collision destroyed its own body as well. It simply wanted to eliminate one more enemy ship. "They are willing to die to kill us," Thisanara observed with growing horror. "No," Vasquez corrected her. "They do not think of it as dying. To them, destruction is just another form of consumption. That ship that rammed yours is already being rebuilt inside the main fleet. They learn from every battle, adapt to every weapon. The only advantage we have is that they underestimate us." As if to prove her point, a massive surge of energy appeared at the edge of the system. The main Devourer fleet was beginning to arrive. Hundreds of ships, each one different, each one wrong in its own special way. Some were clearly built from the remains of other species' vessels, twisted into new configurations. Others looked like they had been grown rather than constructed, their organic curves hiding weapons that defied classification. "Admiral," her sensor officer called out, "I am detecting over 800 contacts. No, wait, the number is increasing. They keep coming." Thisanara stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Her entire sector defense force consisted of maybe 200 ships scattered across 50 systems. The enemy force emerging from the gate outnumbered them 4-1, and those were just the advance elements. "We need to call for reinforcements," she said. "From where?" Vasquez asked. "How long will it take for your nearest fleet to arrive?" 72 hours minimum. They will have consumed this entire sector by then. "Admiral, I need you to understand something. This is not a conventional invasion. The Devourers do not conquer worlds, they eat them. Every living thing on every planet they touch becomes part of their fleet. If we do not stop them here in space, then billions of people are going to die." The weight of responsibility settled on Thisanara's shoulders like a physical thing. She had trained for first contact situations, not galactic-scale warfare against an enemy that wanted to consume every living thing in the universe. But as she watched the Retribution continue its desperate fight against impossible odds, She realized something important. The humans had been facing these same impossible odds for over 50 years, and they were still fighting. If one damaged ship carrying the last survivors of a dead species could still find the courage to fight, then so could she. All ships, she ordered. Target the closest enemy vessels with kinetic weapons only. We may not be able to kill them all, but we can make them pay for every meter of space. During a brief lull in the fighting, as the Devourer fleet regrouped for another assault, Admiral Tisanara found herself listening to a conversation that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Captain Vasquez had opened a secure channel between the Retribution and her flagship, and what she heard changed everything. She thought she knew about the small, primitive species called humanity. "Tell me about the war," Tisanara said quietly. Around them, damage control teams worked frantically to repair both fleets, but she needed to understand what they were truly facing. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, staring at something off-screen. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of loss. "It started on a Tuesday," she began. "I remember because I was supposed to have lunch with my sister that day. The first ships appeared without warning in the outer solar system. We thought they might be explorers from another world, maybe even friends. We had been listening to the stars for so long, hoping to find other life." She paused, checking status reports that scrolled across her screen. "The ships ignored our communications. They went straight for Jupiter's moons, where we had mining operations. Io was gone in 6 hours. Europa lasted 8. By the time we realized what they were doing, they had consumed everything organic on 4 moons and were building new ships from the raw materials." Tisanara felt sick. The casual way Vasquez described the destruction of entire populations suggested trauma so deep that it had become just another set of facts to recite. "How did you fight back?" "At first we did not. We were not a warlike species, Admiral. We had some military forces, but they were designed for peacekeeping and defending against human conflicts. We had never imagined fighting something that wanted to eat us." Vasquez's hands moved across her controls with practiced efficiency. "The first real battle was at Mars. The Devourers had learned from consuming our outer colonies. They knew our weaknesses and how to exploit them. The tactical display showed the current battle, but Tisanara found herself imagining that long-ago fight around the Red Planet. Mars had been terraformed for 200 years. Vasquez continued. 15 million people lived there. The Devourers came in force, over 1,000 ships, each one different from the last. They had adapted, learned from every human they consumed. Our defense fleet managed to destroy maybe 30 of them before being overwhelmed. What happened to Mars? They landed on the surface and began consuming everything. Not just people, plants, animals, even the bacteria in the soil. But Mars fought back. The colonists had been miners and engineers, people who knew how to work with their hands. They turned mining explosives into bombs, construction mechs into war machines. They held out for 7 years, 7 years. Tisanara tried to imagine an entire world under siege for 7 years. Its people slowly consumed while fighting with improvised weapons against an enemy that grew stronger with every victory. The children born during the siege never saw sunlight, Vasquez said softly. They grew up in underground tunnels, learning to shoot before they could walk properly. By the end, we were recruiting 12-year-olds because there was nobody else left. The communication channel crackled with static as the Retribution took another hit from a Devourer probe. Vasquez barely seemed to notice. Earth fell on year 8. 3 billion people died in the first week. The Devourers had learned to use biological weapons by then. Viruses that could rewrite human DNA and turn us into more of them. The planet became a factory for producing new Devourer ships. How did you escape? We almost did not. The last human fleet consisted of 17 ships carrying maybe 2 million survivors. We fled to the asteroid belt and tried to hide among the rocks. For 10 years, we lived like rats in the walls, scavenging supplies and trying to avoid the hunters they sent after us. Vasquez's image flickered as another explosion rocked her ship. When it stabilized, Tisanara could see smoke drifting across the human bridge. The Retribution was built in those asteroids, Vasquez continued. We salvaged metal from destroyed ships, components from abandoned mining stations, weapons from anywhere we could find them. She was designed by people who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. How many survivors made it aboard? 50,000, as I said. But Admiral, you need to understand, we are not just refugees. We are the collected knowledge and experience of a species that has been fighting the Devourers longer than anyone else. We know their weaknesses, their tactics, how they think. The tactical display updated, showing more Devourer ships emerging from the damaged gate. The enemy fleet now numbered over 1,500 vessels, and they were beginning to organize into attack formations. What weaknesses? Thysanara asked desperately. They adapt quickly, but they are still biological creatures. They need organic material to reproduce, which means they have to land on planets eventually. They heal from energy weapons, but kinetic weapons cause permanent damage. Most importantly, they are controlled by hive minds, big neural clusters that coordinate their actions. Kill the cluster and everything connected to it dies. Vasquez's face hardened with grim determination. But Admiral, there is something else you need to know. The Retribution is not just a refugee ship. We are carrying the last of Earth's antimatter production facilities. Jury-rigged, improvised, and probably unsafe but functional. The implications hit Thysanara immediately. You are planning to use it as a weapon? If necessary, yes. We have enough antimatter aboard to crack a small moon. Our plan was to find the Devourer homeworld and detonate it in their primary nesting ground. Take out as many of them as possible before we die. That would destroy your ship and everyone aboard. Yes, Vasquez said simply, but it would also save billions of other lives in this galaxy. Admiral, my people have been dying for over 50 years. We are tired of running. If we can end this here, then maybe our deaths will mean something. Thysanara felt tears running down her face. She was looking at the representative of a species that had faced extinction, and responded not with despair, but with a determination to ensure that no other species would suffer the same fate. There has to be another way, she said. Maybe, but that depends on your people, Admiral. We can share everything we know about fighting the Devourers, our weapons technology, our tactics, our hard-won knowledge of their weaknesses. But we need this galaxy to stand and fight. If your people run, if they try to negotiate or find diplomatic solutions, then everyone dies. The communication was interrupted by urgent alerts. The Devourer fleet had finished regrouping and was moving toward the inner system, where billions of innocent beings lived on hundreds of worlds. They are heading for the populated systems, Vasquez observed. Once they start consuming planets, their numbers will grow exponentially. Admiral, we need to make a choice. Fight them here in space or watch them devour your entire civilization. Thysanara looked at her own fleet status. She had lost 3 ships already and the rest were damaged. Her elegant peacekeeping vessels were not designed for this kind of brutal warfare. But as she watched the Retribution turn toward the enemy fleet, 50,000 humans choosing to face impossible odds rather than abandon the galaxy to darkness, she realized that some things were worth fighting for, even if you could not win. Captain Vasquez, she said formally, the Galactic Peacekeeping Fleet accepts your offer of alliance. Share your knowledge and we will stand with you. Thank you, Admiral. Now let me show you how humans fight when they have something to protect. The Retribution accelerated toward the enemy fleet, its weapons charging for another desperate battle. Behind it, the remnants of the peacekeeping flotilla followed, ready to learn what it truly meant to fight for survival. The final battle began 72 hours later, when the full Devourer fleet emerged from the ruined gate. Admiral Thysanara had used every minute of that time to prepare, calling in every available ship from 7 sectors and converting civilian vessels into improvised warships. The response had been overwhelming. Species that had never spoken to each other suddenly found common cause against an enemy that threatened all organic life. The assembled fleet was massive by peacetime standards. Over 800 ships representing dozens of different species and design philosophies. Elegant Altarian cruisers floated beside blocky Torvan cargo haulers fitted with mining lasers. Zephyrian patrol ships flew in formation with massive Gordian dreadnoughts that had not seen combat in centuries. But as impressive as the galactic fleet looked, it was dwarfed by what emerged from the gate. Contact count is now over 50,000 vessels, reported the sensor officer, his voice barely steady. Admiral, they are still coming through. Thysanara stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The Devourer fleet was not just an invasion force, it was a migration. Entire species worth of consumed worlds had been converted into ships, creating a swarm that blocked out the stars. This is impossible, whispered her tactical officer. How do we fight something like this? The answer came from an unexpected source. Captain Vasquez appeared on the main screen, but she was not alone. Standing beside her were beings Thysanara had never seen before. Humans with scars and modifications that spoke of decades in space. Their faces hard with experience, but their eyes still burning with defiant hope. "Admiral," Vasquez said, "I would like you to meet the surviving command staff of the human resistance. We have been discussing strategy." One of the other humans stepped forward, a tall man with graying hair and cybernetic replacements for his left arm and eye. "I am General Marcus Torres, formerly of the Mars Defense Force. We have a plan, but it will require everything your fleet can give us." "What kind of plan?" Nara asked. "The same kind we have been using for 50 years, Torres replied grimly. "We hit them where they do not expect it, and we make them pay for every victory. The Devourers think like a hive mind. They expect logical defensive tactics. They do not expect what humans do when we get desperate." The display changed, showing a tactical projection of the system. The Devourer fleet was arranged in a complex formation, with smaller ships screening larger vessels and massive bioships at the core that pulsed with neural activity. "Those big ships are the command nodes," Vasquez explained. "Each one controls thousands of smaller vessels. Destroy them, and everything connected to them dies. The problem is that they are protected by their entire fleet. So we create a distraction," Torres added. "The bulk of your fleet engages their screening forces here, drawing their attention. Meanwhile, a small strike force punches through their lines and goes after the command nodes." Nara studied the plan and felt her heart sink.
"General, that strike force would be flying into the middle of 50,000 enemy ships."
"They would never survive." "Probably not," Torres agreed. "But that is what humans do, Admiral. We do the impossible because somebody has to." The Retribution began moving toward the enemy fleet, and Nara realized that the humans had already made their choice. They were going to attempt the strike regardless of the odds. "Wait," she said. "If you are detected too early, they will overwhelm you before you reach the command ships." "We know," Vasquez replied. "That is why we are not going in quiet. Admiral, in about 10 minutes we are going to show these things what humans call a suicide run. When we do, we need your fleet to hit them with everything you have. Make them think that your main attack is coming from the opposite direction." The plan was insane. But as Nara watched the human ship accelerate toward impossible odds, she realized that insanity might be exactly what the situation required. The Devourers had adapted to fight logical, rational opponents. They had never faced a species that specialized in doing things that should not be possible. "All ships," she broadcast to the combined fleet, "prepare for full assault on the enemy screening forces. Follow the humans' lead and make them pay attention to us." The battle began with the Retribution, firing every weapon it possessed directly into the heart of the Devourer fleet. Nuclear missiles streaked through space, followed by streams of kinetic projectiles that punched holes through enemy ships. The human vessel did not attempt evasion or clever tactics. It simply charged straight ahead, firing continuously. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of Devourer ships turned to engage the single human warship, pouring weapons fire that should have vaporized it instantly. Somehow the Retribution kept flying, its hull glowing cherry red from heat but its weapons never stopping. "Now," Nara ordered. The Galactic fleet opened fire from the opposite direction, drawing even more attention away from the human strike. Energy weapons that had been modified to fire solid projectiles sent streams of metal into the enemy formation. Converted cargo ships rammed Devourer vessels directly, their crews choosing death over surrender. In the center of the chaos, the Retribution continued its impossible charge. Nara watched in awe as the human ship took damage that should have destroyed it 5 times over but somehow kept fighting. Sections of hull were missing, atmosphere streamed from dozens of breaches, and half its weapons were silent, but it pressed forward with the relentless determination of a predator that had found its prey. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "I am receiving a transmission from Captain Vasquez." The image that appeared on her screen was barely recognizable. The human bridge was filled with smoke and emergency lighting. Vasquez herself was covered in blood from a head wound, but her eyes still burned with fierce determination. "We are almost through their inner screen," she reported, beginning final approach on the primary command node. "Admiral, whatever happens next, tell the galaxy that humanity died fighting." "Captain, you do not have to—" "Yes, we do," Vasquez interrupted. "This is what we came here to do. Give our deaths meaning, Admiral. Make sure this galaxy survives." The Retribution disappeared into a cloud of enemy fire, its hull finally beginning to break apart under the relentless assault. But even as sections of the ship fell away, its remaining weapons continued firing, carving a path through the Devourer formation toward the massive command vessel at its heart. Then something happened that no one expected. As the human ship approached the command node, hundreds of other vessels began joining the attack. Ships from the Galactic fleet that had broken through the screening forces, determined not to let the humans die alone. Elegant cruisers and crude cargo haulers flew side by side, their crews having learned from human example that some things were worth any sacrifice. All ships, concentrate fire on the command node, Thysanara ordered, leading her own flagship into the desperate charge. The massive bioship at the center of the Devourer formation was unlike anything they had ever seen. It pulsed with organic light, its hull writhing with neural activity that coordinated thousands of smaller vessels. When it realized it was under direct attack, it began to scream across every radio frequency, a sound of rage and hunger that chilled every organic being who heard it. But the combined fleet did not falter. Ships that had never fought together learned to coordinate their fire in minutes. Weapons designed for mining and construction proved devastatingly effective against biological targets. Most importantly, crews that had lived in peace for generations discovered that they were capable of extraordinary courage when faced with extinction. The Retribution reached the command node first, its surviving weapons firing point-blank into the creature's neural core. Nuclear warheads detonated inside the bioship, causing it to convulse and lose control of its subordinate vessels. "This is Vasquez," came a final transmission, the signal breaking up as the human ship began its final approach. Antimatter detonation in 30 seconds. All ships clear the area. Thysanara wanted to order her ships to retreat, but she found herself frozen by what she was witnessing. The Retribution, burning and broken, was ramming the command node directly. The collision tore both vessels apart, but in the final seconds before the antimatter detonated, she could see human crew members in environmental suits leaping from their dying ship onto the bioship's hull, carrying explosives and still fighting even as their vessel died around them. The explosion that followed lit up half the system. When the light faded, the massive command node was gone, and with it over 10,000 smaller Devourer vessels that had been under its control. But the battle was far from over. There were still dozens of command nodes scattered throughout the enemy fleet, and the Devourers were adapting to the new tactics. However, something fundamental had changed. The galaxy had learned to fight, and it was fighting with a ferocity that surprised everyone, including themselves. "Admiral," her tactical officer called out, "we are receiving surrender requests from 17 Devourer bioships. They are confused. Their control network is breaking down." For the first time in the battle, Thysanara allowed herself to hope. The Devourers were not invincible. They could be beaten, and the galaxy had learned how to do it from a species that had refused to surrender even